Welcome back to Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. We have a lot to talk about this week, including upsets, our weekly predictions, along with Anthony Richardson, trades that have gone on, the NBA season, which just kicked off, the World Series, and lots more. So stay tuned in. But Tyler, what an exciting week last week.
Yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy going on last week in the NFL. I mean, a lot of the games were pretty close. I mean, I was looking at the scores last week for the NFL. I mean, really the only, I would say, blowout game was the Lions and Texans. I mean, 52 points to 14 points, that's really crazy. But beside that, I mean, nothing really out of the blue, I would say. Bills beat the Seahawks 31 to 10. I think it's the next highest blowout game, but yeah, I mean, not too many upsets, not too many blowout games. Your average NFL week, I would say, for the most part. But everything happens for a reason. We're going to be going into the upsets of last week, and then like Alex was saying, going into this week with our predictions and what teams are going to be facing what. But yeah, it looks to be a really good week this upcoming week.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, I didn't watch that much of football last week just because I was at the Raiders Chiefs game, which was a lot of fun. Going to the Black Hole is always a good time, and the fans there are very, very dedicated. So it was really fun, but it was really closer. Like, it was a close game and way closer than I thought it would be. But I'm glad that the Chiefs were able to come out with the win.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting watching that game because like the Raiders really don't have anyone on their team as of right now. I mean, they're kind of in a rebuilding phase, like everyone kind of predicted at the beginning of the season. But for them to keep it really close against the Chiefs, I mean, the Chiefs have been they really have not been themselves starting the season. I mean, like we all saw, Patrick Mahomes didn't throw a single touchdown pass in the month of October or so far, and before that last game of October, and then he threw, I think, two last week against the Raiders. But he just has not been performing himself. And the fact that he's still an MVP runner with an 8 to 9 touchdown interception ratio, I mean, that shouldn't really be MVP caliber ratios. Like I really do think like Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen and all of them should be higher than Patrick Mahomes. But I mean, give him credit he has. I mean, they're 7-0 for a reason, but they are struggling, I will say. I mean, for their record showing as what it is, I think if they do face a true contender later in the season, I do think they will, you know, get a face of reality hit towards them.
Yeah, and in that game, Travis Kelce recorded two highs of the season. He caught 10 targets, and then he also recorded 90 receiving yards. So a big game for Travis Kelce. The Chiefs defense was off to a slow start, but that wasn't the case for the Raiders. In the third quarter, Trayvon Maurig managed to pick off Mahomes and set up a touchdown for Las Vegas. And then Mahomes obviously threw for 262 yards and finished the game, like you mentioned, with two passing touchdowns. And with that performance, he became the fastest quarterback in the history of the NFL to reach 30,000 yards. So a big game for Mahomes. Obviously the Chiefs are now 7-0, but that last one was a little bit scary for a second. I was going for the Chiefs. My aunt is a huge Chiefs fan, and it's just always a fun time to watch Mahomes and Kelsey. So it's going to be interesting to see them play for the rest of the season. But one thing to note for the Raiders is that their defense really carries them. Gardner Minshew, he's obviously not that great as a quarterback, but then they have Alexander Madison in the running back area, and he does really well with the Raiders.
Yeah, and like you said, like Gardner Minshew has been playing spectacular on any means, but he's still out there, leading the Raiders to a 2-6 record, which I know like a lot of people kind of expected earlier in the season, but he did beat the Ravens earlier this season, which I think was a huge surprise to a lot of people. He's still out there, having the Raiders contend for a lot of these games. And for him to go out there, after he gets benched for Aiden O'Connell comes back with a broken thumb, and for him to come back and almost beat the Chiefs last week, I mean, it does show that he does have that fiery spirit that he does want to try to compete somewhere where is able to start. And I think the Raiders are giving him that chance to show, like, hey, like this is your chance to prove yourself. Like, what can you do on this team? And he's been doing a decent job so far. I mean, granted, they've lost a couple games here and there, like Steelers, Rams, Broncos. They beat the Browns. Lose to the Panthers, but it really is one of those games where if he clicks, it'll be a lot better for the Raiders later on in the season.
Yeah, and then another thing that took place this week, the Vikings and the Rams game, and then the Rams upset the Vikings. The final score was 30-20, which was a big surprise for a lot of people. And then I mentioned this a lot, but we have a pool going at our work, and I was kind of thinking, well, the Rams will beat the Vikings. So then I went in, I thought I changed it, but I guess it didn't change because, when I went back later, it still showed that I chose the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, like, Cooper Kupp came back, and that was announced a little bit before that game started. I think it was announced that Tuesday or Monday of that week. But then you get to game time, and then all of a sudden, like 3 or 4 hours before the game starts, the Rams like, oh, Puka Nacua is going to be active this game. He's going to be playing limited snaps, and for him to go out there and single-handedly changed the outcome of the game. I mean, for him playing limited snaps, I think he only played like 42% of the snaps or something like that, or something ridiculous. But for him to go out there, make 7 catches, 106 yards, and make that big of an impact against this Vikings team, which is one of the best in the league right now, and for them to lose 20-30, which ended on a controversial call, shall I say, with the face mask that wasn't called against Sam Darnold. But yeah, I mean, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp just single-handedly changed this offense and how it's played. I mean, granted, Demarcus Robinson had 2 touchdowns that, allowed the Rams to extend that lead, but Matthew Stafford, with both his top 2 receivers back, I mean, he played fantastic, 280 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Sam Darnold, he's been kind of digressing a little bit, but still 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Justin Jefferson's been playing spectacular still. But I read that there was this thing with the Lions that every time a team loses to or every time that a team that plays the Lions, they always lose the following week. And it's interesting because you look at the record of the Lions. The Lions, they're 5-2 right now. They're currently fighting for the number one spot with the Green Bay Packers. So there's a lot on the line this next week with the divisional match, or excuse me, 6-1. But there's a lot on the line next week with their divisional matchup. But you look, the Lions beat the Rams week 1. They lose to the Buccaneers week 2. They lose to the Cardinals week 3. Or they beat the Cardinals week 3, they beat the Seahawks week 4, beat the Cowboys week 5, beat the Vikings week 6, and they beat the Titans week 7. So you look at all those teams. Rams lose week 2 to the Cardinals. Buccaneers lose week 3 to the Broncos. Cardinals lose week 4 to the Commanders. Seahawks lose week 5 to, I believe, the Giants. And then Cowboys lose week 6 to the God, I can't think of the team right now. 49ers, that's who it is. And then now you have the Vikings lose to the Rams last week, and now with the Titans losing to with the Titans losing to the Lions this last week, I mean, there's a lot of, decision to be made there with the game this upcoming week. I mean, Patriots play the Titans and, not that big of a matchup, but a lot of people are favoring the Titans to beat the Patriots this upcoming week, which I mean, both teams suck to be fair, but is that something that could, play out the way that it has been for the last 7 weeks for teams playing against the Lions? So a lot of interesting things to be made there. But yeah, so that I mean, Rams, are the Rams. Vikings need to pick up the pace a little bit. But yeah, I mean, great win for the Rams. I mean, after that win, I think they stopped all trade talks with Cooper Kupp because, like we mentioned last week, Cooper Kupp was supposed to be traded to the Chiefs, but the Chiefs didn't want to, overpay for that receiver just for the season. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. I mean, now with the team healthy, there is a chance, the Rams might take the number one spot with, the Cardinals, who now lead the number one spot after their upsetting win against the Dolphins yesterday. So, or last week, I should say. So, yeah, a lot of interesting things going on in the NFC West.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously, the Jets Patriots game, very interesting. Um, so it's going to be interesting. Obviously that one was a division matchup, and those games are always very competitive when it comes down to the wire, and people just are excited to see those types of games. And then, the Patriots were able to walk away with that one with a win. The Jets just they cannot win a game. It's really at this point it's just like very questionable just because of their roster. And then also they made that coaching change and they still can't win a game. So it's going to be interesting to see what the rest of their season looks like. But what are your thoughts on the Jets?
I think right now they're at a point where they probably aren't going to make the playoffs. I mean, you're sitting at a what, a 2-5 record right now, and for them to lose to teams like the Steelers, to the Patriots, after they make the trade for Devontae Adams, I mean, it really it's kind of concerning. And, Aaron Rodgers hasn't been playing great by any means. I mean, I think this year alone he has more interceptions than he has the last whatever, like 3 seasons, 3 or 4 seasons. I mean, 12-7 touchdown ratio. That's not anything spectacular by any means. But yeah, I mean, when your 2 wins come from, the Titans and the Patriots week 2 and week 3, I mean, those 2 teams are what, 3-14, week 3-13, something like that. Not a great record. And then you go out, you lose to the Broncos by 1 point. You lose to the Vikings in London. You lose to the Bills because you can't kick the ball. You lose to the Steelers after you trade for Adge. You lose to the Patriots the second time, and now you're playing this Texans team. Has been a little bit injured because they just lost, or they lost Nico Collins a couple weeks ago to IR with the hamstring injury. Um, you know, they just lost Stephon Diggs last week after an ACL tear against the Colts. So now they're going to be down to Tank Dell as their starting receiver. So there's a lot of question there, but I still think, the Texans, with all their injuries that they've suffered so far, I still think they're a better team than the Jets. I mean, the Jets are a healthy team, but they're so dysfunctional. And I mean, you fire your head coach, you demote your offensive coordinator, you bring in a new head coach, you promote some other guy to take over offensive coordinating issues, and you still are 0-2 in those 2 weeks. All that happens. I mean, there has to be something to happen that turns this organization around. But at this point, I think you're too far in the season that you really can't fight for a playoff spot anymore. I mean, 2-6 is a hard record to fight back from. That's essentially like you have to win out your entire season, to even make a wild card spot, especially with the Bills in your division. I mean, you face the Cardinals, you face the Colts, you face the Seahawks, Dolphins, Jaguars, Rams, Bills, Jets. I mean, or the Dolphins again. And granted, the schedule is not terrible, but it's definitely not a favorable one that you want to, win out the rest of the season, especially with, having to face the Bills again, having to face the Dolphins twice. Now Tua is back, having to face Seattle, having to face the Rams. I mean, it's going to be a tough matchup, and I don't think Aaron Rodgers is quite capable of taking this Jets organization to a playoff again. And, with everything going on, a lot of Jets fans have been speculating, like, what would the team look like if we, didn't resign, or if we let Aaron Rodgers walk and just cut him from the team next season. Granted, they would face a huge, penalty with cutting Aaron Rodgers because of the whole money issue with his contract being guaranteed and stuff like that. But is it a better decision to move on from Aaron Rodgers and, just start fresh again at the QB position and just start over again? But, you know, it definitely is not looking great for the Jets this season.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And then, the Ravens Browns game was also a close one. This game was actually the only game that I was able to get a glimpse of. They had this game on at the Mandalay Bay. We went to go eat over there right before the game. So, this was the game that was on TV. And, there was no question as to why. The Ravens have not had a good season. Right now they're 2-6. When this game was being played, they were 1-6 or 1-5. Um, Actually, no, 1-6. Um, so
Oh, you're
anyway,
good.
Obviously the Ravens with Derrick Henry and, Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers and, just many, many great players. They fell to the Browns with Jameis Winston after Deshaun Watson got injured. Jameis Winston came in and he was able to throw 3 passing touchdowns, so a huge win for the Browns, and it just kind of makes people question if Jameis Winston is going to be a better leader than Deshaun Watson is for the Browns.
I think, with Deshaun Watson coming in for the Browns, I mean, granted, the team's too far, like I said, to even reach the playoffs with their schedule. I mean, you're in one of the hardest divisions in football with the or the AFC North, Steelers, Bengals, Ravens. I mean, those are all top teams. I mean, beside the Bengals, but, you know, Ravens are one of the top teams in the NFL. Steelers are one of the top teams in the NFL. And for them to, beat the Ravens like they did last week, I think was impressive. But the Ravens defense didn't play spectacular. They had 3 dropped interceptions that, could have changed the outcome of the game. But I think for the Browns, I think things are looking up. I mean, Deshaun Watson, not a great quarterback, hasn't been playing anywhere spectacular the last couple of games with the Browns. But for Deshaun Watson to come in, beat a very big rival team with the Ravens, I mean, that changes the whole impact of this Browns organization. And, I think it's nice to see Jameis Winston come out and make his, appearance in the NFL after being written off as kind of like, oh, you're kind of like a backup quarterback for your career. You're not going to be anything more than that. For him to come out and to show people like I can be a starter caliber again, like I was at the Buccaneers, like I was going to be with the Saints before I got injured, and for him to make that comeback into the NFL. I think it's great to see Jameis Winston do that. But like I said, they still have a pretty tough schedule ahead after, halfway through the season. I mean, you have the Chargers this week. The defense has been playing great. I think they've only allowed 14 points on average each game, which is really good. You play the Saints, who have been kind of a disaster. You play the Steelers, whose defense is probably top 10, like I keep mentioning. Play the Broncos, who, again, have another top 10 defense. Play the Chiefs. You play the Bengals, the Dolphins, the Ravens. I mean, it's a tough, tough stretch of games. But do I think it's possible for the Browns to get done? I do think it's possible to win some games, but like I said, it's probably not possible for them to win the playoffs, but it will make some impact. Like, hey, like we are a good team, we just haven't been playing like a good team. So I do think Deshaun Watson or Jameis Winston coming in is definitely going to change the culture of this Browns team.
Yeah, for sure. I have to agree with you on that. I think that the Browns are too far in their losses to really do anything the rest of the season. But moving on, another big upset that took place this week was the Cardinals Dolphins. This game a 1-point game, and the Cardinals, they were trailing. At first it was close, and then the Dolphins just kind of went ahead, and then it was late in the fourth quarter when they really made some more noise and just came on that comeback run. And the Cardinals ended up walking away with the win. So I was happy to see that and hear it. Kyler Murray has just been leading the Cardinals to some great things. The Cardinals now 4-4, the Dolphins 2-5, which is a surprise, obviously, with Tua Tagovailoa coming back, and then Devon Achane, who really does a great job with Tua by his side. And another thing too to mention is that now the Cardinals are actually in the hunt to take control of their division. I think them and the 49ers are actually tied right now, with the same amount of wins and losses. So from now on, both teams will just be working to clinch the top division title.
Yeah, and after this upset win for the Cardinals against the Dolphins this last week, I mean, they really, I feel like this last game they finally got things clicking. I mean, Marvin Harrison finally had another I would say, yeah, triple digit receiving yard list against, a team like the Dolphins who have been a really decent defending team, but not like anything spectacular. Kyler Murray throws a 300-yard game for the first time since I think 2021 or something like that, 2022. Trey McBride definitely getting something rolling. James Conner still, the running back that he's been for the Cardinals, is still producing big numbers. But I think passing wise, I think it was a game that the NFL needs to see. Cardinal fans need to see like, hey, like we're still just as dangerous passing the ball as we are running the ball. Especially now, you've got connection with Marvin Harrison. You've been having the connection with Trey McBride over the last couple weeks. But yeah, this was definitely a really big game for for Cardinal fans. And like I said, I mean, you lose this game, you're essentially out of the playoffs with the division of the NFC West. But now you win that game, Seattle loses the game against the Bills. You're the number one seed in the NFC West right now, tied with, the Seahawks and the 49ers. The Rams are kind of back there, but they're kind of slowly making comeback with their two receivers being back. So interesting stuff going on there. Obviously the defense hasn't been spectacular. I mean, the worst third down defense in the league so far. There has been talk that the general manager for the Cardinals has been calling teams for defensive ends, edge rushers, whatever the case may be, for pass rush because the Cardinals haven't had that great of a pass rush win rate against any team so far. But there's teams like the Giants who have been shopping Azeez Ojulari. There's been teams like the Browns who have been in somewhat of negotiations of thinking about trading away Myles Garrett. Obviously, the Raiders have been in talks of giving away Max Crosby, the Bengals with Trey Hendrickson. So there's a lot of teams, wanting to trade edge rushers, defensive ends, whatever the case may be. But I think it's what the giving price of those players are. And granted, you still have to think about like how is the team gonna progress with the future of the trade? How are they going to fit in with the role of the team? Whatever the case may be. So a lot of decisions to be made there, but the Cardinals are sitting 4-4, number one in the NFC West. So great things going on with the Cardinals. Dolphins, I mean, Tua just came back, like you said. Achane's been picking up pace since Tua's been back. I think give him. I think after last game, I think he'll be okay to play the rest of the season with adapting back to speed because you miss 5 games, it's a really big deal, especially after suffering a concussion. Getting back to pace is definitely something you want to focus on. So I think probably not this week against the Bills, but after this week, I think Tua will be back to his normal self, making you know pretty deep passes to Tyreek Hill, getting Jonnu Smith more involved, getting Jalen Waddle more involved. Achan's gonna be back. Mostert's back from being injured. You still have Jalen Wright, who's slowly picking up production as the rookie running back as the third string on the team, and everything's kind of clicking now with this offense for the Dolphins. But I mean, you don't want to lose to a team like the Cardinals. But I mean, great win for the Cardinals, and like I said, I mean, a lot of you know decisions, a lot of unexpectedness to come from weeks on end. And now the Cardinals, with the fourth easiest schedule in the NFL, supposedly, there's a chance that the Cardinals could realistically, make the wild card, which is something a lot of Cardinal fans are hoping for.
Yeah, for sure. But obviously on Halloween, the Texans and Jets will be facing off. So a big night for Halloween. And the Jets fans just hoping to finally have their team, clinch a win against a competitive team. Or any team. I mentioned earlier the Jets have only won 2 games this season, and having Aaron Rodgers on your team, that's a big deal. And a lot of teams just would, trade away anything for a quarterback like that. A future Hall of Famer. But not only that, they have Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson. Now they have Devontae Adams. And, they're a solid roster, but then they just can't find any wins. So tonight they'll be facing off against the Houston Texans, with Joe Mixon, Tank Dell, Nico Collins is on the IR, and now Stephon Diggs will be out for the rest of the season. I'll let you touch on that a little bit, but it's going to be an interesting game, and I have to go with I'm going to go with the Texans because I think that they have more of a team chemistry than the Jets do. And I think they have a solid foundation with D'Amico Ryan, running their team, and then also Hernandez on the defensive side. I think that he's going to really put Aaron Rodgers under pressure, and Aaron Rodgers is not really a fast scrambler, so I think it's really going to get to him. And I really think that this will be probably most likely a defensive game. I do think Tank Dell will perform pretty well, except I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't, because I think that he's going to be covered a lot now that, you know, um, Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins are out. So I think it's going to be a big one tonight, but it's going to be an interesting game.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with Stephon Diggs, I touched on this earlier in the podcast, but he did go out with an ACL tear against the Colts. It was a non-contact injury, so those are pretty serious when there's no contact involved with the injury. So with that, I mean, your number one receiver is Tank Dell. You're probably gonna be looking at Dalton Schultz a little bit more with his experience in the NFL, but like you said, it's going to be a very defensive team. Uh, Texans defense has definitely been the healthier side of the team rather than the offense. I mean, you still have Kamari Lassiter, you still have Derek Stingley, like you said, you still have Will Anderson, who's been making a pretty big impact on teams. But I think this Jets defense has been struggling a lot against the run, and with the running back like Joe Mixon, I mean, that could single handedly change the outcome of the game. And with CJ Stroud being able to make plays to, Hank Dell, Schultz, whatever the case may be. I think a lot of people kind of forget that Tank Dell was the number one receiver before he got hurt last season, and then you had the impact of Nico Collins come out. But Tank Dell should still have an impact in the game. I mean, granted, he's going to be going against, Sauce Gardner, which is not someone you want to be going up against in, your games that you're down your top two receivers. But it is what it is. I'm sure the Texans will get something done. But this Jets offense really just has not been clicking. I mean, like I said, Devontae Adams hasn't had over, I think, 10 catches yet. He's still under 100 receiving yards the last two games, which I mean, both games have not been tough matchups, but it kind of is just like a lost cause for the Jets. And you have to wonder, like, are they just going to intentionally tank for better draft stocks? Are they going to intentionally, let the team lose for whatever the case may be? But yeah, I do think the Texans are going to win Thursday night tonight.
Yeah, for sure. And then Monday or on Sunday, the starting game in the morning is Cowboys Falcons. So that's going to be an interesting one. Obviously the Cowboys haven't done good this season. They've only won 3 games. And then when you look at the Falcons, they're 5-3. And heading into the season, a lot of people projected that the Falcons would be a good team. And, they were right. They're led by Kirk Cousins. And then they have Drake London. And, they're just a good team. The Cowboys, they're a good roster. They're kind of like the Jets. The Cowboys obviously have Dak Prescott and, Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb, but, they just can't really do anything. And, I don't know, a part of me wants to go at the Cowboys, but I'm going to go with the reliable one and the consistent one, which is the Falcons.
And there's some interesting decision with the Cowboys. They just announced that they are bringing back Deron Bland, who had a foot injury at the beginning of the season, so he's placed on IR to start the season. But he's going to be back against the Falcons this game, or should be at least. But you know, we kind of all saw how Deron played last year. Not super great. I mean, granted, he had he broke the record for the most pick sixes in NFL history or something like that last season. But coverage wise, he hasn't been playing great. Trayvon Diggs hasn't been playing great. The defense has not been playing great at all. You're down, Demarcus Lawrence, you're down Micah Parsons. So that defense just really is non-existent against this Falcons offense, which has Darnell Mooney, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. All those players have an impact on that Falcons offense, and for them to be playing against the Cowboys defense that has not been playing spectacular by any means, I do think Kirk Cousins is gonna put up some numbers against this Cowboys defense. And I mean, offensively for the Cowboys, really your only big players are Ferguson and Lamb. Your running backs haven't been spectacular. You know, Nothing else beside those two players have been making this offense. I mean, granted, you almost beat the 49ers last week, but the 49ers are now like the kings of choking games in the last half of the game. So who knows? And, Dak Prescott, hasn't been playing spectacular. And then you're playing against the Falcons defense, which, has um Grady Jarrett, it has AJ Terrell, it has Jeffrey Simmons, all those players. You add a Matthew Judon from this offseason, and you mean the lineup is definitely not in your favor for this game. So I'm gonna take the Falcons to start Sunday morning off.
Yeah, and then moving on, the next game that will be taking place, the Denver Broncos against the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to take the Ravens on this one after they fell short to the Cleveland Browns. I think that they're gonna come back strong, and I think that they'll have no problem facing the Broncos. The Broncos have kind of shown that they are a reliable team after only losing 3 games, especially with Bo Nix who came in. And surprisingly, the Baltimore Ravens and Denver Broncos are even when it comes to the record. But I just think that the Ravens have the advantage here. Except at the same time, they both are led by some longtime NFL coaches, Sean Payton being on Denver's side, and then obviously Harbaugh on Baltimore's side. But I think that Lamar Jackson, who has been in the league for a bit longer than Bo Nix, and then they have Derrick Henry, and they're just a good team overall, and their defense is also good with um, you know Patrick Queen. So I'm gonna go with the Ravens on this one, but maybe Bo Nix will surprise people.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Ravens as well. But I wouldn't put it past the Broncos and Bo Nix to make it a close game against this Ravens team. I mean, right now, the sports books have it at -8 for the Ravens, which I mean the Ravens are supposed to win by at least 8 points. I think to start off, I think the bet opened up at -9.5 or something like that. So the odds have definitely been getting lower. I mean, granted, the Ravens just made a trade earlier this week with Deontay Jackson from the Panthers. He was traded to the Baltimore Ravens for a 5th round pick. So, they add some veteran experience to their receiving core with, Zay Jones or Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. So their offensive core is definitely a lot stronger. But defensively, I mean, both these defenses are pretty well matched. I would say the Broncos are a little bit better than the Ravens, but I mean, it's definitely gonna be one of those games where the Ravens are gonna be focusing more on the run game with, Javonte Williams, Bo Nix, who can run the ball. Broncos wide receivers aren't terrible by any means, but they're not spectacular. So I don't think there's any focus there. Granted, Ravens defensive secondary is not great, but they still should be able to keep up with those Broncos receivers. So I do think it'll be a closer game than expected. I mean, Broncos defense has been playing spectacular the last couple of weeks. But they did almost lose the game to the Panthers, after trying to run up the score and then end up being a 28-14 victory for the Broncos. So nothing great there, but I do think it'll be a closer game. But I do think the Ravens will still win.
Yeah, and Patrick Queen actually was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers, so not a part of Baltimore's defense anymore, but when he was there, he played phenomenal. But moving on, the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills. Obviously this one's going to be interesting with Josh Allen and then Tua Tagovailoa coming back, but it's hard to go against Josh Allen. I'm going to take the Bills on this one. I think that their defense is really good with DeMar Hamlin on that side, and then obviously on the offensive side they have a number of great players. So I'm going to take the Bills on this one. I think that the Dolphins, obviously they have Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, except I don't think that they'll get it done. The Dolphins have not shown us, consistent things this season, and I know that they were suffering a quarterback loss with Tua Tagovailoa being out with a head injury for part of the season, but it's just hard to rely on them, and I think it might take a few weeks before, the team is back to normal and their chemistry is like how it originally was.
Yeah, and you talk about Tua with his concussion that he suffered. I mean, going back to week 2 when the teams did play against each other, they still had Tua for the first 3 quarters, and watching Tua play against this Bills defense, I mean, it wasn't great by any means. I mean, the team only put up 10 points compared to the Bills, I think 34 points or something like that. So, I mean, the Bills were able to know how to play Tua and the Dolphins. I mean, they knew how to stop Tyreek. They knew how to stop, Devon Achane. They still knew how to like play defensively around all these great players that the Dolphins do have. And, like you mentioned with the chemistry not always completely being there after, coming back, losing to the Cardinals. I mean, it's going to take some time. So the Bills probably do have the upper hand against the Dolphins, but like you said, divisional matchup. They're always hard, but I don't feel like this game is going to be anything close. I think it's going to be more of a blowout. I mean, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, and Tua could come out and throw for 3 touchdowns, 300 yards against this Bills defense. But realistically, I don't think the Bills are going to lose this game against the Dolphins. So I'm going to have the Bills winning this game. They probably will end up, taking the division with how crappy a lot of these teams have been. I mean, really, their only tough team so far is the Dolphins, and for them to blow them out week 2, 10-34, really shows some, impact on how the division's been. I think, and now I look at it, I think every other team in the division is 2-6 or 2-5. So that really tells you how great the Bills have been this year. I mean, granted, their division hasn't been spectacular, but yeah. So I'm gonna have the Bills winning this week against the Dolphins in the matchup against their divisional rival.
Yeah, and then moving on, the New Orleans Saints taking on the Carolina Panthers, and there was some word that Derek Carr might be back this week, if he wasn't announced already to be back. Um, and the Saints really, really started out the season very strong. We say this all the time, and then they just completely fell apart. And then when you look at the Panthers, obviously they have some great receivers, Adam Thielen being one of them. And then, but they don't have a reliable quarterback. Right now they were with, Bryce Young, and then they put in Andy Dalton, and I think they're no, last week they played with Bryce Young. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Both these teams are just kind of iffy, and it's going to be an interesting game, but I think that the Saints have the upper hand here. So I'm going to take the Saints, but the game is going to be played in Carolina, and I'm sure Carolina is hungry for a win. So I would not be surprised if Carolina was able to pull one off against the Saints.
Yeah, and with Derek Carr maybe coming back and playing against this Panthers defense, I mean, nothing's been great for the Panthers so far. I mean, like I said, the Panthers just lost their number one receiving target, Deontay Johnson. So now you have to rely more on Xavier Legette, who's going to be playing against Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, really everything screams that the Saints should win this game, but like I said, they have fallen 0-6 the last 6 games. They started off super strong, like we keep mentioning, and like you mentioned earlier. But I mean, they really have not had anything clicking so far. I mean, the Panthers have won one game that was week 3 against the Raiders, which I think was a little bit of a miracle now looking at it, but I mean, it is what it is. It probably will be a closer matchup than it should be. Bryce Young has been looking a little bit better, but I mean, the Saints should walk away with a victory this game. So I'm going to go with the Saints this game. Panthers just, you know, they're kind of in a whirlwind of trouble with, trades, with, injuries, with whatever the case may be. So I think the Saints are going to pull out a win this week and, hopefully keep trends going. But if not, I mean, I could see the Saints firing their head coach if they lose this week to the Panthers.
Yeah, for sure. And then, moving on, the Las Vegas Raiders going to be taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. And, obviously the Raiders hung in there with the Chiefs last week. So, you know, that was a surprise, but I'm going to take the Cincinnati on this one. Joe Burrow is just a great quarterback, a Heisman winner when he was in college, and he has a lot of experience and he knows how to lead his team. And I think the only thing in the way of the Bengals is their defense. And we've been saying that all season long. Their defense really needs to improve, but it seems like they've gotten a little bit better. Right now, the Bengals are still doing, pretty decent. They are currently 3-5. That's not great, but it seems like they're kind of picking things up. And, the Raiders on the other side, obviously they have Alexander Madison and then they have Max Crosby. And I think Max Crosby is going to create a lot of pressure for Joe Burrow. So if the Bengals want to walk out of their stadium with a win, they're going to need to hold for Burrow and, just be able to hold and give him some time to find a way to make a play. And, I think really that's the key. I mean, it's not really that hard when you're going up against Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, and the Bengals have been slowly picking up pace, but their wide receivers have been injured a lot of the games. I mean, T. Higgins missed the first 3 or 4 weeks with a hamstring injury. Jamar Chase now suffering a little bit of an injury with I forgot what it was, but he's not 100%. Bengals, running game hasn't been spectacular by any means. I mean, they've been running with Zach Moss and Chase Brown, which I mean, they've been getting it done, but it's nothing compared to like other NFL teams around the league. But yeah, I mean, the Raiders have just been their defense hasn't been great. I mean, the only shining point is, like you said, Max Crosby, who could be traded away in the next week or two with NFL trade line this next week, actually. But there is, speculations about, what could happen with the team if they were to trade away players, what could happen to the Bengals if they trade for players, if they trade away players. But I do think the Bengals will win this week against the Raiders. Their 3 wins have come from teams that are less than 2 wins. I mean, you beat the Browns, you beat Panthers, you beat, I believe, the Giants. Yeah, the Giants. So, I mean, realistically, the Bengals should beat this team, but like I said, it probably will be a closer matchup than it should be. And there'll be some questions with the head coach, the offensive decisions, whatever the case may be, going into the future if this game is super close. But I do have the Bengals winning this game.
Yeah, and I think really that's going to be the biggest takeaway from this game as we head into next week is what happened in this game and how did the coaches handle it? Obviously Zach Taylor has been the head coach of the Bengals for a little bit of time and he's led them to some great times and also some not so great times. And Antonio Pierce came in as the interim head coach and he led them to a little bit more success than they've had in a while, but then it looks like things just fell apart and things aren't meshing anymore. So it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see which types of plays are called and the decision making in this game. I think it's really going to be a evaluation of both head coaches, and you hit that right spot on. But moving on, the Los Angeles Chargers going to be taking on the Cleveland Browns. And obviously, both teams have not done that well this season, except the Chargers. They're doing all right. They're 4-3, and, it just seems like they're picking up the pace as well with Justin Herbert, who has came into the league doing really great. And then, he's one of the ones who just kind of fizzled away. I wouldn't say all the way. He still is a decent quarterback and he's still able to make some plays, but, you know, He's not consistent. And then on the Brown side, obviously, they're having their own issues with quarterback problems. Um, and then, but I have to go with the Chargers on this one, even though the game is going to be played in Cleveland. And Cleveland's coming off of a big win against the Ravens, but I gotta go with um with the Chargers.
Actually going to flip to the opposing team. I'm actually going to go with the Browns that win this week. And the reason I say this is because, you know, Jameis Winston changes the dynamic of Browns offense. Nick Chubb has been coming back. He's been playing more and more ever since the injury, since week 2 of last week. And, he played 2 weeks ago, scored his first touchdown back. Uh, Played last week. I think he had 84 yards, which is definitely an improvement from what he had week 7, where he had 20 yards and a touchdown, but no touchdown from last week, 84 yards instead. Like I said, this Chargers defense is definitely one of the more underrated defenses in the league. Like I said, I think they keep a total of 14 points per game defensively. So a lot of things to be said there, but I do think the Browns will somehow pull away to get it done with Jameis Winston. Nick Chubb definitely being more of a reliant on the run game. Jameis Winston, getting the ball passed downfield with his arm strength, his play decision that we saw against the Ravens. I do think, the Browns will get it done against this Chargers team. I don't think the Chargers are in the capability of, playing to a top team. And I'm not saying the Browns are a top team by any extent, but they do have a really, really strong defensive core. Granted, Denzel Ward went out last week with a concussion, so there might be a little bit of a hit to their secondary, but still, I mean, the Browns defense is definitely a lot stronger than most defenses in the league. I mean, you still have Myles Garrett, you still have, uh Zerdavius Smith, who has been playing to a decent level for the Browns, but I think the Browns are going to beat the Chargers this week at Cleveland, which is another huge impact with Browns fans being as passionate they are. So I'm going to go with the Browns this week.
Okay, and then moving on, the Washington Commanders with Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler taking on the New York Giants. And, this one's going to be interesting, especially Daniel Jones, Malik Neighbors. They've picked things up these last few weeks, but their record has not improved. They're still 2-6. And, obviously, Malik Neighbors, a great receiver for their team and a huge, asset. And a lot of people were criticizing Daniel Jones coming into the season, saying that he's not that good and that he can't lead a team. And then they also still have Brian Dayball, which, over the last few seasons has been on the hot seat multiple times. And then when you look at the Commanders, it's an entire franchise that just got turned around. And, Jaden Daniels just playing phenomenal. And then you have Terry McLaurin and Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson, who just make some huge plays. And, for that reason, I'm going to go with Washington. I think that they're a better team overall. I think that they have one goal, one focus, and that's to be remaining, and that's to make it to the playoffs. And I got to go with Washington, and they're very consistent, and you watch them every single week, and they're always just punching it in there in the end zone. And Jaden Daniels just has a great attitude while he's out there on the field, just looking to make some plays and looking to add up the numbers for his rookie season.
Like you said with Gene Daniels, I mean, he's been playing to an MVP level as a rookie. I mean, unthinkable numbers, completion rating, whatever the case may be. He's been playing to a top level as a rookie quarterback. And I think a lot of people watching him in college didn't think he could ever play to that level, especially playing at ASU. Like I know you at ASU kind of watched him here and there, but he definitely has changed a lot from playing where he was in college to where he is now. I mean, Heisman winner last year and his last year with the college. I mean, he definitely has improved a lot. And his record, 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and you go look at his rushing stats. I mean, 4 touchdowns. It definitely is a very different offense with Jaden Daniels. But they did only beat the Brown. Did only beat the Bears last week with a Hail Mary to Noah Brown, which was a miracle to watch live because it was insane. But this team could realistically be 5-3. I mean, still a really good record. But I think going back to week 2 when the Commanders did play the Giants, it was only a 3-point game, and the only reason that the Giants lost was because they didn't have a kicker. And Daniel Jones still played spectacular against that defense. They still played really well. The Giants defense gave Jane Daniels some trouble. I mean, you have Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau coming off the edge with Dexter Lawrence in the middle. I mean, that's a tough pass rush matchup to even start with. Obviously, the Giants don't have Kayvon Thibodeau. They have Azeez Ojulari, who's been making a huge stand for the Giants defense. I mean, he's racked up 5 tackles in the last 3 games, or 5 sacks in the last 3 games, which is really good for him and trying to, get himself a starting spot on either the Giants or a team that wants to trade for him when Kayvon Thibodeau comes back. But this will probably end up being a really close game. Granted, uh, Tyrone Tracy Jr. went out last week with a concussion, so they'll probably rock with Devin Singletary for this week. Nothing, spectacular there. I mean, Tracy Jr.'s been playing really great for a rookie running back. But Devin Singletary still knows how to run the playbook, still knows how to, fit things where they go. But I think it'll be a closer game, and we're at the point where it's halfway through the season. Is this Washington Commanders team going to keep up with how teams are progressing, or is Cliff Kingsbury going to fall apart like he usually does at the midpoint season and just any point in the football season? I mean, we saw it at Texas A&M, we saw it with the Cardinals, we saw it at UCLA. I mean, is Cliff going to actually change for this Commanders team, or is he going to fall apart like he usually does at these midpoint seasons? So I do think the Commanders will win, but I do think it'll be a really, really close game.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point mentioning Cliff Kingsbury. Obviously he led the Cardinals a few seasons ago, and he really he led them to the playoffs. And then after that, it was a downfall and a very rapid one. So it's going to be interesting to see if he can keep up the pace and keep up the success with the Commanders. But moving on, the New England Patriots taking on the Tennessee Titans. And, there's been a lot of talk lately about the Titans. And, it's crazy to see that they've only won one game. A few seasons ago, they were also pretty good, and then they just fell apart as well. And then obviously, they just traded DeAndre Hopkins to the Kansas City Chiefs. And when you look at the Patriots, the same thing, Jacoby Brissett started the season off, and then now they're led by Drake May. And, nothing really is going right for either one of these teams. And, the Patriots were able to come off with the win, last week, and the Titans are just trying to find help in every single way. I'm going to go with the Patriots on this one, and the game is going to be in Tennessee, but, I really don't think that matters in this case.
I'm actually going to go away from the Titans. I'm actually going to pick the Patriots. And the reason I say that is because, we talk about the statistics of facing the Lions, and the Titans just faced the Lions this last week and lost 52-14. So when we look at the record of Lions or opponents that play the Lions, they always lose their next game. And I think last week was one of the big wake up calls, like, oh, the Vikings just lost the Rams. Like maybe this is, something we look at. And I do think, the Patriots are a slightly better team than the Titans. I mean, like you mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins is no longer on the team. So they're rocking with Calvin Ridley, Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard, whatever other players on the team. They probably won't have Will Levis back. They're probably rocking with Mason Rudolph. But I mean, the Patriots, they're a young team. They're still developing. They have Hunter Henry. They have Drake Mays, who suffered a concussion last week, who might be back. I mean, it depends on how bad the concussion was, but I'm probably going to assume not. So it's probably Jacoby Brissett. The wide receivers are young. Ramondre Stevenson's still playing at a really good level against run defenses and stuff like that. But I do think the Patriots will pull off a win against the Titans this week, and progress to a 3-6 record. Um, I don't see anything spectacular happening to any of these teams after this week. I think, I think both these teams actually are going to be, giving up some players at the trade deadline. I know there's talks about Harold Landry, the star pass rusher for the Titans, getting traded to another team, which could be another big possibility to make, you know, one of the teams that don't have a great pass rush even better, or improve the pass rush of whatever other team. But yeah, I do think the Patriots will win this game and set themselves into a better future going on down the road.
Yeah, and then, moving on, the Chicago Bears will be taking on the Arizona Cardinals at home. And, this one's going to be an interesting one. I can't decide on this one. Obviously, I want the Cardinals to win. But then on the Bears side, they're led by Caleb Williams, Keenan Allen. They got Cole Kmet. And, they're just a good team overall. Their defense is also pretty solid. They're 4-3, which, heading into the season, obviously Caleb Williams was the big topic. And then he's led them to, 4 wins and then only 3 losses. And then on the Cardinals side, they have, James Conner, who is just playing phenomenal, and he's very underrated. I think a lot of people don't really credit him, and, he's just played a great season this year. And then also Marvin Harrison, who was drafted in the first round, he hasn't gotten the ball a lot, but in the last game, and you talked about this a little while ago, he kind of picked things up, and the ball was in his hands a few times in the last game. So, I think he's really going to pick up the pace. It's really kind of hard to trust in the Cardinals, but, that's just what we do as fans. And, I think for that reason, I'm going to go with the Cardinals. It's a home game. They've beaten the 49ers. They just beat the Dolphins. And, I really do think they have what it takes to beat the Bears.
And we talk about how the Cardinals have one of the easiest schedules in the league now that, it's kind of halfway through the season, but this Bears team is definitely one of the better defensive teams in the NFL. I mean, offensively, they've been kind of hit and miss, just depending on who they play. I mean, Caleb Williams has been hit or miss. DeAndre Swift has been playing, at a mediocre level. He hasn't been playing spectacular. He has been playing, horrible. I mean, to start the season, he did play horrible, but he's kind of picked up production here and there. DJ Moore has been, underperforming, but I think that's more of Caleb Williams' problem. Cole Kmet's definitely, had some moments. Adunze, who actually is third in the team for receiving yards, hasn't been, anything spectacular. I think a lot of his receiving yards came from his matchup against the Colts, where he had 112 yards. So give or take that. But yeah, I mean, this Bears offense has been very luster for all the offensive weapons that it has. And we've talked about this before in previous podcast episodes. But I mean, this defense unit is what keeps the Bears in a lot of their games. And it's kind of crazy to look at this, but like you have Montez Sweat, you have Jane Johnson, you still have, all these great players who have been making an impact to keep the Bears in these games. And you look at like Gervon Dexter Sr., who leads the team with 4 sacks. You still have Darnell Taylor, who was traded from Seattle, and he's been making an impact. And, all these players have been somewhat producing for these Bears teams. And you look, TJ Edwards, I mean, Tremont Edmonds, I mean, all these players make the Bears defense what it is. And we look at this and, I think we kind of skim past it because we're like, oh, there's not really any big superstar names, but that team really has, the potential to take the Bears far if the Bears offense can actually produce numbers. And we see they're at a 4-3 record. They could be at a 5-3 or 5-2 record had they, not had the Hail Mary that happened last week with Tyreek Stevenson kind of celebrating before the Hail Mary, missing up his coverage, whatever the case may be. But it was definitely an interesting thing to watch that they kept close with the Commanders, and I think a lot of it relied on their defense, but, they've had some injuries, they've had, people getting banged up with, being hurt, and, Montez Sweat has a calf injury, so there's a lot of question we had there. I mean, granted, the Cardinals, they've had some injuries, but they've had quite a few people come back from injury reserve. I mean, they just had their star left tackle, Jonathan, or no, the star right tackle, Jonah Williams, just come back from the IR. He's been practicing this week, so he could have potentially, boost up the offensive line. Darius Robinson was activated off the IR, but I think it was solely because they didn't want him to miss the rest of his rookie season. But there's been some great things going for the Cardinals. Like I mentioned earlier, Marvin Harrison had his first triple receiving yard or triple digit receiving yard game since week 2 against the Rams, which was, I think, kind of a fluke. Trey McBride had another triple digit game after last week against the Packers. Kyler Murray is definitely picking up production. It's helping out James Conner run the ball more. Whatever the case may be, you still have Michael Wilson, who had a touchdown last week. Greg Dortch make a couple of great plays last week, and Elijah Higgins, still producing for this Cardinals team. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a really, really close matchup this week. I think it's going to be one of the better games this week, just because of how both teams have been playing. Granted, Cardinals defense has been playing spectacular by any means, but you know they've been getting it done. They've been doing what they need to do. And for them to be sitting at the top of the NFC West at a 4-4 record, I think is a pretty successful win for the Cardinals, especially since, this wasn't supposed to be the year that they were supposed to go out and make the playoffs. I think a lot of people were hoping that they would, but for the fact that it is potentially going to happen for Cardinal fans, I think that's a huge success for them. But yeah, this will be a close game. I do think the Cardinals will pull it off. I mean, Chad Ryland has, definitely stepped up his game since Matt Prater went out with an IR with his leg injury. But, he just won NFC Special Teams Player of the Month, which is a huge deal for Chad Ryland. Obviously, he's had 3 game winners. Seattle, or not Seattle, San Francisco, Chargers, and then last week against the Dolphins. So, you know, Cardinals have been getting it done. Drew Petzing has definitely picked up production a little bit here and there. Nothing spectacular, but he's been getting it done. As long as that offense can produce and the defense with Nick Rawls can get stuff done like they have been, I do think, they can apply pressure on Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams will throw a couple of turnovers. I think the biggest players in that game are going to be, DJ Moore and Roma Dunze, who are going up with a very not so great secondary, but I do think the Cardinals will get it done this week.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Bears Washington game. I can't remember the last time a lot of people wanted to watch those two teams play. That just goes to show how good these teams have, developed into. And, it's really interesting. But, anyways, moving on, the Jacksonville Jaguars is going to be taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. This game will be at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, and the Eagles will actually be wearing their throwback uniforms, which are pretty cool. They're cool looking, and I can't stand the Eagles, if I'm being honest. But the Eagles, they're a good team. They have Jalen Hurts, and then they got Saquon Barkley. Their record 5-2 against the Jags, and then the Jags 2-6. So it's going to be an interesting game. The Eagles are obviously the better of the two, and they're just a good team overall. They have a good offense, and I know at the beginning of the season, a lot of people were questioning Nick Sirianni and, asking if maybe he could be on the hot seat and if this would possibly be his last season leading the Eagles, but he's obviously picked things up, and, the Eagles had a slow start, but they're back on their pace. And that's not the case for the Jags. You know, they're led by Trevor Lawrence, and then they have, you know, a few good players. I know that one of their players just went out with a collarbone fracture, Christian Kirk. So, you know, on this one, I'm going to take the Eagles. I think they have a bigger chance of winning compared to the
Now,
Jags because of
the
the
Eagles have been,
team's
picking up
history.
production. I mean, they're second in the NFC East right now behind the Commanders. This Jaguars team just has not been playing to the level that should be after paying so many players in on their team. I mean, granted, you lose Christian Kirk to a broken collarbone during the Packers' loss to them. Now he's out for the season, so now with Christian Kirk not playing for the rest of the season, Brian Thomas not playing for this week with the injury he's had. I mean, it really is going to be a harder matchup for the Jaguars to get something done against this Eagles defense because the Eagles defense really kind of lacks with their secondary, and now they have Gabe Davis and whoever else is playing at wide receiver for that team. I mean, granted, you have Evan Ingram coming back, so maybe he does some numbers there, but I mean, this Jaguars haven't just produced anything that could be dangerous for teams to look at and be like, oh, like this is something we need to focus on. I mean, ETN hasn't been playing great at all. Tanks Bigsby has been kind of taking over that role. Like I said, Gabe Davis has been kind of hit or miss. So that, and then you look, their offensive line just got more depleted after they traded away their franchise left tackle to the Minnesota Vikings for a future conditional sixth round or fifth round pick. So I mean, the Jaguars just don't look like themselves. And I do think the Eagles are gonna, blow out this team. I think they're gonna show them like, hey, like we're just as in the running as the Commanders are. But yeah, I mean the Eagles are gonna absolutely slaughter the Jaguars this week.
Yeah, for sure. And then moving on, the Detroit Lions going to be taking on the Green Bay Packers. You know, obviously, this will be a highly watched game, but, you know, obviously, the Detroit Lions just kind of showing their strength, you know, across the league. And they've only lost one game. I think, really, at this point of the season, you know, the Lions have just shown consistency each and every week. And I talk about their strengths each and every week because they show it each and every week. And, you know, being led by Dan Campbell, a person as passionate as him, you know, he used to be a former player with the Lions, and he's just very passionate. He's passionate to lead the team to success, and that's exactly what he's doing. You know, and then you look at the Packers with Josh Jacobs and, you know, Jordan Love and Romeo Dobbs. And, you know, obviously they're a strong team as well. They've lost two games. So, you know, the Lions, obviously, and the Packers, you know, very similar. The Lions have just already gone through their bye week, but anyways, you know, I'm gonna take the Lions on this one. The game is gonna be at Lambeau, which I think the Lions will struggle a little bit with that. But you know, I think the Packers are really overrated, and I know their record is good and stuff, but you know, something about them really just rubs me, you know, not it rubs me a little bit the wrong way. And you know, obviously Jordan Love is a great quarterback and stuff. And you know, they have a good team, but I really think that, you know, the Packers are not as good as people think. So I'm going to go with the Lions on this one. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions went all the way. I know we're only going
Yeah,
into
and
week 9, but,
like you
you
said, the
know, they're
Lions
a
have been
really
playing
good team.
spectacular, and with all the injuries they've suffered over the last couple of weeks. I mean, obviously their big one being um or I can't believe I blanked on his name. Aiden Hutchinson, yeah. When after they, I'm gonna
Oh,
restart
Aiden
that.
Hutchinson?
Yeah, the Lions have been playing to a spectacular level. I mean, they suffered a lot of
Okay.
injuries over the last couple of weeks. I mean, obviously the noticeable one being Aiden Hutchinson, who is now out for the season with a fractured tibula. But I mean, for what it's worth, they've been playing pretty well, and they're still one of the top contenders to play in the Super Bowl this season at the end of the year. Obviously, Jameson Williams been suspended a second time this season with some uh PED suspension or something like that. And then you have the case of his gun possession that he had where he almost got arrested for that. So there's a lot of, controversy with all of that. Packers this week, you might not have Jordan Love after he went out last week with a groin injury. So, there's some question up there. I mean, Lions, like I said, still have one of the better run defenses in the league. And, Josh Jacobs is not looking very promising. Secondary for the Lions hasn't been, great. You still have to face, Romeo Dobbs. You still have to face John Tavarius Wicks, Christian Watkins, Tucker Craft, whatever other players on that Packers team. But these two teams always have a close game against each other, and for the Lions to be playing the Packers in Lambeau, I think that is a huge deal because, like you mentioned, Lambeau is a hard place to play in. But I do think the Lions will pull off a win against the Packers this week. Maybe when they face each other next week or next time, I think the Packers will upset the Lions. But I do think the Lions will upset the Packers this week, keeping their number one division leader just a game ahead of the Packers. But yeah, I do think the Lions will win this week against the Packers.
Yeah, for sure. It's really, really hard to go against the Lions. But moving on, the Los Angeles Rams going to be taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously the Rams, picked up the pace and took down the Vikings, a team that was highly recognized across the league, after they got back Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua. And then when you look at, the Seattle Seahawks with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Geno Smith and, um, Zach Charbonnet, they're really a good team, except it's hard to, rely on them. They're even with the Cardinals, the 49ers, everybody's just kind of fighting for that NFC West division, title. And, when you look at the Rams, obviously, they are also in the NFC West. But when you look at the Rams, it's hard to count them out because they've been without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua, the entire season. So, I'm going to take the Rams. A lot of people forget that they won the Super Bowl just a few seasons ago. And, their main people are back, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua. So it's going to be hard to guard them. And, Matthew Stafford is a good quarterback. So I'm
This
taking the
this
Rams
game I
on
think
this
has
one,
to be
even though the
split.
game is going to be at
And
Lumen
the reason
Field.
I say this game has to be split is because, like you said, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua are both back for the Rams, so their offense is obviously going to be significantly better than it has been the past couple of weeks. Um, Seattle's defense has been playing to a great level of being able to contain, pass, contain the rush. I mean, obviously they've had a bad couple of games here and there, but they're still sitting at the number one tie for the number one spot in the NFC West with the Cardinals and the 49ers. But I think this game will depend on if DK Metcalf plays this week. And the reason I say that is because the Rams secondary has been horrible against the passing game. And Seattle has been one of the top teams with you know, passing completions, passing attempts, whatever it is. DK comes back. He's obviously going to be the number one receiver on the team. Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the number two with Tyler Lockett and, Noah Fant making, a pretty big contribution for that team. Kenneth Walker, obviously being the star running back, he's going to be having some big gains here and there with how much passing the Seattle Seahawks are going to have. But I do think the Rams are going to pull off a win. I think that, their defensive line is a little bit better than the Seahawks for offensive line there. I think the same thing could be said about the Seahawks defensive line against the Rams offensive line. But I think it comes down to the secondary and, Puka and Cooper are playing against, Witherspoon and Reek Woolen. But I do think, with how much target shares those two players get, I think, there's going to be some question as to what can they not do against Seattle's defense? And, same thing could be saying about DK Metcalf, about Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I don't think DK and JSN and Lockett have that same value that Puka and Cooper Cup have. So I'm gonna rock with the Rams. I don't think it's gonna be a blowout game. I think it might be like a 2-point game at most, but I do think the Rams will pull off a win.
Yeah, and this is what makes it so interesting is the NFC West is, just being fought for. But anyways, moving on, the Indianapolis Colts and the Minnesota Vikings. This one will be an interesting one on Sunday night. This one's going to be at the Viking Stadium, so going to be noisy there. And, this one will be interesting. I'm going to take the Vikings because I think they're a better overall team. Obviously they're led by Sam Darnold, who stepped in after JJ McCarthy, hurt his knee. And then, Justin Jefferson also a part of the team, just making a lot of noise there in Minnesota. But, the biggest thing is, Anthony Richardson won't be playing. Joe Flacco will actually be playing. And I think a lot of people, see this as a loss for Indianapolis. And, obviously last season, Anthony Richardson played a great season until he got hurt. But then people just kind of, put Joe Flacco off of their radar. And, he's a good quarterback and he led the Browns to the playoffs. I mention that a lot because I think that he doesn't get recognized because he's, on the older side of the NFL. And then, he's just doing good things for the team. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do for the
Yeah, I'm
Colts.
gonna take the
But,
Vikings on this one
I'm
too.
going to take the
Like you mentioned,
Vikings on
Anthony
this one.
Richardson, getting benched this last week against, the Houston Texans. The head coach came out and said, we're gonna bench him for the foreseeable future. So Joe Flacco will take over for the remainder of the season until, barring injury, whatever the case may be. But I think one of the big reasons why Richardson got benched was obviously, one, how he's been playing, but two, with how he pulled himself out of the game against the Texans during one of the drives because he was tired. And I think, seeing that kind of, is not something you want your franchise quarterback to do. But yeah, I mean, I think with Joe Flacco, I think it's the same thing with the Browns. I think Joe Flacco gives them a better chance to win games. Granted, Anthony Richardson, he has the ability to run the ball as well, but Joe Flacco, his ability to pass the ball and make plays where it needs to happen, I think is something that Anthony Richardson just doesn't have right now. And granted, he didn't play a lot in high school with injuries. He didn't play much in college because, he didn't have the potential to play. But I think a lot of NFL scouts last year looked at him and was like, oh, he has raw potential. He has, a strong arm. He has, quick running ability, quick play decision making. But um, I don't think, Anthony Richardson is in the right spot right now to be a starting quarterback for a team that, has a chance to, take the division, has a chance to fight for a playoff spot. And I think Joe Flacco gives you that chance to, better improve yourself. I think he has a better chance to give the receivers, better options, better choices, better opportunities, wherever the case may go. Whereas, Anthony Richardson, he was kind of like chucking bombs left and right, missing them 90% of the time. Every once in a while, he'd have like some 50-yard touchdown and be like, oh, wow, look at Anthony Richardson, but then wouldn't hit anything else the rest of the game. I think looking back at last game, I think the stat line for Anthony Richardson was like 2 for 15 with one touchdown, one interception for like 69 yards or something like that. So obviously nothing great there, but I think Joe Flacco gives him a better chance for his team. But like I mentioned, I mean, the Vikings, one of the better defenses in the league, one of the better offenses in the league with Justin Jefferson and Sam Darnold picking up production. I do think Joe Flacco will have a great game statistically against the Vikings just because they'll be down by so much to, ramp a comeback. But I do think the Vikings are win this game against the Colts.
Yeah, me too. And then moving on to Monday night, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to be taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. And I've been thinking about this one a lot this week, and you know, this one will be interesting. And I say that because the Chiefs are a good team. They really are. They have Mahomes, they have Kelsey, and it's really hard to count them out. They're the only remaining undefeated team, and you know, that brings up the question as to whether, being undefeated, puts a lot of pressure on the team. And, the last time a team has been undefeated was when the Patriots did it, and that was years ago. So, it's going to be interesting to see if the Chiefs can navigate their way through the remainder of the season as an undefeated team, or if they will fall at some point. And, that really puts the question as to if they will lose to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And, this game's going to be at Arrowhead. And Arrowhead is one of the loudest, if not the loudest, stadiums in the NFL. And, I've been going back and forth on this one because, obviously Vita Vea is on the defensive side for the Buccaneers. And then, the Buccaneers have Cade Otton, who got a lot of receptions last week, with Chris Godwin being out and Mike Evans being out. And then they have Bucky Irving, Rashad White. The Buccaneers really started off the season as a good team, and I'm not sure I can trust them anymore. And a part of me wants to say that I really think that maybe this will be the week that the Chiefs fall. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the Chiefs are really good. The Chiefs are a fun team to watch, and it's Mahomes. Mahomes is very, very, very hard to go
Yeah, and
against.
I think
So
one of
I'm
the
going
big
with the
things
Chiefs
with
again
the
on this one.
Buccaneers is obviously the loss of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who, went out 2 weeks ago with their injuries. Had they had both of them, I think this game would have been a very different outcome. But, I digress. The Chiefs obviously sitting under the last undefeated team this year. Um, I don't know. Their defense has been playing really, really great. I think that's the only saving grace for this team right now. Mahomes hasn't been playing great at all. I mean, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins last week, who, is still trying to learn the offense, still trying to find his role in the offense, whatever the case may be. But I mean, the Buccaneers, you're down to your fourth and fifth string receivers at this point in the season. Rashad White's definitely been like your better receiving player, unfortunately for the Buccaneers. Bucky Irvin's, been the better running back, rushing wise. Sean Tucker, he had his big game, and he really hasn't been making that much of an impact now since the team's so injured and everything like that. But I think it'll be a close game um, with how the Buccaneers defense has been playing. I mean, Kareem Hunt's going to have a good game. I think Travis Kelsey will have himself a better game. Obviously against Levante David, it's going to be a hard matchup between them two, but offensively, I think is where the Buccaneers are going to crumble. You still have Chris Jones, you still have Nick Bolton, you still have uh, what's the cornerback's name? McDuffie, and looking at how the Chiefs have been playing so far, I don't think the Chiefs are going to lose against the Buccaneers, especially being at Kansas City. Things are just not looking great for the Buccaneers. So I'm going to have the Chiefs winning on Monday night, right before the trade deadline, obviously. So that's going to be another big impact to see what happens after that game. If the Buccaneers are going to trade for someone, if they're going to, trade away people, chances are Chiefs are done with trading. I mean, they might bring in a couple other players just for whatever other reasons. But yeah, so Monday night will have a huge impact for the trade deadline, depending on what happens with the Buccaneers. But that will be that. And, that's going to conclude this week's NFL's schedule for week 9 going into week 10. So with that, I know the NBA season started last week. And, things have been, you know, pretty crazy so far. I mean, the Suns are sitting at a 4-1 record, or 3-1 record, barring the game tonight. Lakers are sitting at 4-2 after losing the last couple of games, but it looks to be like a good NBA season.
Yeah, for sure. And it's going to be interesting. I know a lot of people, especially Suns fans, were, talking about Kevin Durant and how he's fizzled out. And, you know, heading into this season, I think a lot of people were just questioning whether or not he will be good again this season or if he'll play like last season. And, it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be fun to see. Obviously the Suns made it to the finals a few seasons back. So, that's the goal for the fans here in Phoenix. But, especially another thing that is interesting is that the USA men's team won Olympic gold. So that's a big thing in the NBA. I know that that is already in the past, but I'm sure that hypes them up a little bit. And one thing to also mention is just there's been a lot of players on the rise. Obviously Anthony Edwards of Minnesota has made a lot of noise. Last year, and then obviously heading into this season. So it's going to be interesting. I'm interested to see which teams kind of navigate their way through the season easier than others. And I think that Minnesota obviously they're in my eyes. After seeing their run in the playoffs, I think they're a strong team. But I guess we'll just have to see what happens through the season. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Suns. And another interesting thing is Bronny James and LeBron James both playing on the same team, the first father-son duo in NBA
Yeah, and
history.
it's kind of
So
funny because
that
I
is a
just
big
saw this
deal when it
post
comes to the
the
NBA.
other night. LeBron James and Bronny James are now the highest scoring father-son duo in the NBA because Bronny Jones got his first point the other night. And I just think that's hilarious because it's like, oh wow, like look at this. Like you guys are already breaking history and LeBron James, going into the NBA after facing all these doubters is like, oh look, like I just broke history, but like I think it's just so stupid because it's like, LeBron, obviously being, all-time leading scorer in the NBA, and then Bronny coming in, he's like, oh, look at me, I just broke history. So I think that's just a little funny thing that's going on, with the NBA. But yeah, I mean, the Nuggets, they haven't been playing super great. Obviously, their first round pick got injured in the summer training camp, which is unfortunate because I know he had, you know, a lot of looking forward to, especially learning under Jokic to go into the season. Obviously, uh, another big hometown hero with GCU is Gabe McLaughlin being out on the training camp for the Nuggets. So I think there's a lot of natives chanting for the Nuggets. Unfortunately, after them beating the Suns to go to the finals a couple years ago. The Celtics are looking great. I mean, granted, Tatum didn't play much last game. He didn't play well last game, but yeah, I mean, there's so much up in the air. Like you mentioned, Katie and Booker, they still have 2 more years left. So their window is kind of closing for the final series. So it's either this year or next year with their new head coach and Bud. I think, things are looking up. Obviously, Bud was the head coach for the Buccaneers that beat, or the Bucks that beat the Suns back in 2020. So, it's a little bit of bad blood there, but it's always nice to have a good head coach come back to the Valley. So, things are looking great there, but yeah, I mean, the Suns are hopefully one of the top teams to beat for the NBA going into the West.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you look at the WNBA, obviously there's been some expansion teams recently with, San Francisco being granted a team and then Portland being granted a team. But, when you kind of look around and, just like evaluate which states would be good for a WNBA team, there's a few states that come to mind. And, Kansas City was brought up by Patrick Mahomes. So that's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see if Kathy Engelbert, you know, puts that in her book and tries to create a team in Kansas City. That'd be interesting because obviously Kansas City does not have a men's team. So, that'd be interesting to see a WNBA team
Yeah, and I think,
in Kansas City
with
before a
the
NBA
WNBA
team.
expanding like the way it is, I think, it's going to be one of the next big things to come onto the sports world. I mean, we saw how much viewership the WNBA got last year with Caitlin Clark joining the WNBA. So I think things are looking up for WNBA fans just across the world, across the country, whatever the case may be. And with Mahomes coming out, like you mentioned, wanting to put a WNBA team in Kansas City, I think, there's a lot of hope that there's going to be more people, more viewership, especially in bigger areas like that.
Yeah, for sure. So that's something to stay tuned into and be paying attention to. Another thing that was paid attention to recently was the World Series between the Yankees and Dodgers. So, what an interesting run for the Dodgers. In 2020, they could not have a parade after they won because of COVID. So, this time around, I'm sure they'll have a good time. But, a lot of people didn't know, in the postseason, there was a few teams that kind of, caught the eye of the viewers. And, the Dodgers, obviously, with Shohei Ohtani, who came over from the Angels, um, and, got an insane deal. I think it was the biggest contract in North American sports history. Led his team to the World Series. And then in the World Series, the first game, Freddie Freeman hit a grand slam, the first
And the first
one
walk off, to be
to be
exact.
recorded in World Series history. So, just yeah, what an incredible run for the Dodgers. And, being in Arizona and being Diamondbacks fans, it's hard to, say this, but it's hard
You
to
cannot be
not
proud of the
be
Dodgers. We
proud
were the
of
reason
them
we
and just
we
give
built
them the
that team.
credit.
After, I mean, the D-backs swept them last year in the playoffs. I think the Dodgers were like, we can't let that happen again. And they go and sign Otani, and they go and sign Yamamoto from the Japanese league, and he ended up being one of the best starters for the Dodgers this season, of course, since before he got injured. But I mean, yeah, I mean, the team did play really good for the most part.
Yeah, for sure. So, an incredible run for the Dodgers. Obviously, the series went to New York, and then a lot of people thought that it would head back to Los Angeles, but the Dodgers came back after trailing by 5 points, 5 runs. They came back and just won the whole thing.
Yeah,
So,
and
you know,
I mean, the Dodgers
that
are right
was
now our
that was a
favorites
great
to
run
win the
for the
World Series next
Dodgers.
year, obviously, because the team they have, there's chance that they might sign Juan Soto. I mean, Juan Soto just came out and said he's looking at all teams right now to see what teams can sign him. So maybe there's a chance, the D-backs might sign him. I don't think so, but Dodgers definitely another one of those teams looking at him that would automatically make them, I mean, World Series contenders again. But you know, it's hard for teams to go consecutive years to the World Series and win consecutive years. I mean, I don't think it's ever happened before. If it has, it's happened, you know, quite a few years ago, before I think like the 60s or something like that. But yeah, it's definitely going to be one of those big games that will go on, especially with the Dodgers and how the Yankees played. I mean, the Yankees didn't play super great, but it's going to be something to look forward to next season. And with that, I don't know if you have anything else you wanna add on or not.
Yeah. Well, the main thing and the main takeaway from the World Series, obviously Shohei Ohtani being the biggest player for the Dodgers, but then leading his team to the World Series and then not being named the MVP. Obviously that was Freddie Freeman. So, a round of applause for Freddie Freeman for just closing out the series,
Yeah,
winning the
he
World
actually
Series
broke,
for the team, and
the
just,
MLB record for most
succeeding
consecutive World Series
overall.
home runs hits, and, with that, it's, something, Freddie Freeman, I think, can add on to his resume, going out, winning finals or World Series MVP, breaking history like that, obviously, shattering history with the grand slam like we talked about earlier. I mean, he really put fire into that Dodgers team to win the World Series. And I think, after that first game with the walk-off grand slam, I think, I think everyone kind of knew the Dodgers were going to win that World Series, and then go into Game 2 and you blow them out again, and just things weren't looking great for the Yankees. And Aaron Judge not being there for playing the way he has, I think really kind of shot down any hopes the Yankees have. But I mean, props to the Dodgers for winning the World Series 4-1 again. It's gonna be a great season next year with all the big free agent signings, all the people going to free agency, whatever the case may be. Same thing with the NBA. I mean, NBA season just got started, like we mentioned. There's going to be a ton of things going on, whatever the case may be. But with that, I think that's going to close out this episode for Talking X's and O's with Alex and Tyler. Make sure to check in next week after the NBA season or after week 9 of the NFL season. We'll talk more about the NBA season, talk more about whatever else is going on in the sports world. But with that, I think that's going to end out this week's podcast. So we'll see you guys all next week.